In 2011, From Software released Dark Souls, a dark fantasy action RPG that garnered a reputation for being incredibly challenging while simultaneously extremely gratifying. It was an improvement in almost every way over their initial stab at the genre, the PS3 exclusive Demon's Souls, and was received so positively that it heralded the start of what would eventually be known as the Soulslike genre. I did not play Dark Souls on release, mainly due to its reputation and believing that I would not enjoy such a punishing title. In March 2015, however, From Software and Sony released the PS4 exclusive Bloodborne, and I was intrigued. The change of setting from medieval dark fantasy to something that resembled a cursed Victorian London caught my interest. Perhaps it is because I am from London and the blood and gore slick streets of Yarnham reminded me of home. Bloodborne is, in my opinion, a masterpiece, and one of my favourite games of all time, and it made me realise that I actually loved this genre of game. Since getting the Platinum Trophy in Bloodborne, I went on to finish all of FromSoft's Soul series, Sekiro and Elden Ring, as well as a handful of Souls-likes like Nioh. None of them, however, not even Sekiro, have hit quite the same way that Bloodborne initially did for me, but Lies of P has come incredibly close. I have slashed, parried, and lied my way through 48 hours of Lies of P to earn all the trophies, and here is my review. Lies of P is an action RPG where you play as a boy called P, named after the titular character from Carlo Collodi's 1883 novel Pinocchio. Except instead of a puppet made of wood skilled at getting into mischief, you are a puppet made of steel skilled at murder. Awakening alone in a train car, you soon realise the city of Krat is almost completely empty, most of its citizens having been brutally murdered by your mechanical brethren. These puppets have been affected by a strange phenomenon known as the puppet frenzy, which has driven them to ignore their prime programming laws which forbid the harming of humans. The start of P's bloody quest is discovering what has caused this bizarre change at first, but it quickly progresses to show there is more going on than just some malfunctioning robots. Almost as soon as you get past the first boss, you hear about something known as the petrification disease that has been running rampant in Krat for some time, and the game hints that these two things might be linked through the mysterious substance known as Ergo, which also happens to be the game's currency. Discovering the truth behind this and putting a stop to it becomes the crux of the story, and I don't want to go into spoilers for it, but there are reveals I found genuinely surprising and interesting. It is really a fun, uncomplicated story, and this is something I think Lies of P did really well compared to a lot of other Souls-like games. Its story was very clear, and not hidden in item descriptions and vagaries. There was a definite sense of forward momentum in the story, and the characters progressing in it in both the main quest and in optional side conversations. And although it wasn't a story that had me glued to each cutscene, I felt the tale did enough to keep me interested in solving its mysteries, and honestly, this was way more than I expected going into the game. One of the core narrative mechanics in Lies of P is the fact that, unlike the other puppets in Krat, P can lie. As you explore the city, you meet other characters, some of whom will stay in the hotel and act as merchants or help you upgrade your gear, and others will be enemies. Many of these have side quests associated with them, and during these you are given the opportunity to tell the truth or tell a lie. An early example of this is there is a woman standing outside a tram that you need to use to progress the story. When you meet her, she asks if you are a stalker, which is a militant organisation in the city. You can choose to lie to her, giving her the stalker's salute, in which case she will just let you use the tram. Or you can be a good honest boy and say nothing, in which case she will attack you, and defeating her drops the key for the tram, so you can use it that way. As you make your way through the story, though, many of these options have other effects. The more lies that you tell, the less puppet-like P becomes, and there is even a weapon locked behind lying as much as you can. 2 of the 3 possible endings you get also relate to how honest or deceitful P has been throughout the game, and I enjoyed that when I played through New Game Plus, there were new character moments and story beats to see depending on my choices. One other small thing that I really enjoyed about the story in Lies of P is how many references and nods to Carlo Collodi's original there are. I love that many of the stalkers you meet and fight in the game are based on the animals from the original tale, and will all wear animal masks just to make the connection more obvious. Geppetto is here, obviously, as the creator of P, but there is also a turquoise-haired fairy character. Antonio the carpenter is now represented by Antonia, the owner of the hotel, among many other cute touches. My favourite of these is how the Lies of P represents Pinocchio's conscience, in this game named Gemini, but spelt Gemini, who lives in a small lamp at P's belt and offers some helpful dialogue throughout the game. My only wish is that he was maybe a bit more chatty, as sometimes it felt like whole chapters had gone by without him saying anything or reacting at all. The other main characters of the game, as they are in any Souls-like, are its enemies. Lies of P has a really good variety of creatures for you to shout at as they pummel you into seeing the death screen that taunts you with lie or die. The initial puppets you meet are really well designed, and I liked how much thought seemed to have gone into what these puppets would have been used for before the cataclysmic event happened. There are traffic wardens, butlers and policemen in the initial areas, but as you progress you start to encounter more unique enemies such as robot soldiers, gunmen, and even these weird creepy faceless robots that reminded me of the Working Joes from Alien Isolation, and these make up the bulk of the puppet forces that you must fight your way through. The game also has elite enemies, which are stronger and often larger, that are essentially mini-bosses that you run into, and these are used just enough to feel like challenges on your path, but rarely frustrating. They also have some really cool designs, like the giant Harlequin robot that throws juggling clubs at you. These elite enemies tend not to respawn either once you have defeated them, so it really felt like beating one was a milestone in my progress, even if it did cost me a lot of healing resources. On the other side of the coin are the organic enemies, which are creatures that have been mutated by the petrification disease, and I found a lot of these to be grotesquely brilliant, especially the designs of some of the elites. They are generally faster than the puppet enemies and tend to use different status effects, and the game switches between these two enemy types depending on where you are in the game. I loved this though, as it always kept things fresh and engaging, and I always felt like I was meeting new enemy types all the way up to the end of the game. I also really enjoyed that none of the enemy placements felt random, like each enemy type made sense to be in the locale it was in, and it helped some of the later progression with the locales and enemies you find there stand out all the more. Lastly are the true superstars of the game, the bosses. There are quite a large number of these in the game, and there were not many that I managed to beat on my first attempt. Many of them took honestly an almost embarrassing amount of tries before I finally beat them, but with very few exceptions, each boss felt unique and exhilarating to fight against. There were so many bosses that I thought had incredibly interesting designs, and a lot of them had so much sheer cool factor to them that even the frustration of dying so often has not left me with bad memories of them. On my first playthrough of the game, the last three main bosses I found to be incredibly hard, almost to the point where I wasn't sure how I was going to beat them, and if I was even going to manage to earn the Platinum Trophy. However, I did eventually learn their movesets and managed to beat them, and looking back on them now, even if I was incredibly frustrated in the moment, I loved those three fights. And the last one asks so much of you with learning how to parry and learning how to dodge its moves, it sometimes felt unfair. However, as I beat them again on New Game Plus after about 3 hours of trying, I felt the same satisfaction I felt after beating the Sword Saint in Sekiro or Gurman in Bloodborne, and I loved that Lies of P's bosses elicited those feelings in me again. So now, let's talk about how you rip and tear your way through the city of Krat and beat the behemoths that stand in your path. Lies of P plays essentially the same as most other Souls-like games. Use your stamina to attack, dodge and guard, and managing this is key to victory. You have stats that you can level up, and each level costs a certain amount of the in-game currency, which as I mentioned before is called Ergo, and you earn this from defeating enemies. You have a finite healing source that is restored whenever you rest at Stargazers, which are this game's bonfires, but doing this will also reset all the minor enemies in the area. This will all sound incredibly familiar if you have played any other Souls-like game before, and Lies of P doesn't really do anything to reinvent the wheel here, and I'm not really sure it needed to. What it does do though is draw inspirations from the games that came before it in its combat and make them into a wonderful cocktail of brutal but fun fights. When you are fighting, you can choose to dodge attacks or guard against them. Guarding an attack will cost you stamina and it will take a small chunk of your HP, but much less than you would take if you had not bothered to guard at all. However, the game will let you earn this HP back by hitting the enemy, which is similar to Bloodborne, where it rewards aggressive, risky counterattacks after you guard. There is also a parry, where if you guard at the correct time, you don't lose the HP at all, and you do a large chunk of stagger damage to the enemy. If you do enough stagger damage through a combination of parries and heavy attacks, the enemy will stagger, and you get the opportunity to do a big critical attack on it. These micro decisions in combat make it feel incredibly tense and exciting, as you need to react to the enemy's moves correctly to not get hit. The enemies also have access to what are called fury attacks, where they glow red for a moment before they strike. These cannot be dodged through or guarded against, but they can be parried, or if you run far enough away you can avoid them entirely. If you parry these attacks, it does a huge amount of stagger damage, and potentially can break the enemy's weapons. Other attacking options include your Legion arm, which is a robot arm that can be swapped around for different effects. The default is like a grappling hook that will drag enemies towards you, but as you progress these can be swapped for a flamethrower, a shield, or even a gun. You have throwable items such as small saw blades and shot puts, a grindstone that restores weapon durability but can also add a temporary elemental or status effect to your weapon, and a lot of other weapons you can use. The number of weapons you have access to is incredible, with all of them feeling very different and being really cool looking. Most of these also let you swap the blades and handles around, so you can keep the big hammer you found, but put it on a sword handle to keep the faster moveset, but do a little bit more damage. In fact, with all the upgrades and options that the game gives you, it can feel a little bit overwhelming, and I spent a lot of time in the hotel's practice yard trying different weapon combinations and different Legion arms, trying to find a set that really gelled with me. But thankfully the game gives you enough upgrade materials that you can experiment with a few of these weapons without ever feeling like you've made a mistake. This breadth of build variety was something that I really appreciated though, especially on my New Game Plus run of the game. About halfway through the game, you unlock the ability to respec your character for a small cost of a currency known as gold coin fruit. Around a quarter of the way through my second run, I found that I was really struggling and decided to make some changes to my build. My initial build was a mixed technique and motivity build that focused on dodging and swiping after a dodge, and using a Legion arm that placed mines to catch enemies off guard. I decided to respec and went with a pure motivity build this time, putting way more points into strength and capacity than before, and used the extra stamina regen that I had to focus more on guarding and parrying with the shield Legion arm. This build felt so different from the first one, and it also felt more effective, and it carried me all the way through to the last boss. I did not change my weapon in either build though, because the Bonesaw is the best sword in the game, and I won't hear otherwise. The game's combat as a whole is brilliant. It's fun and frantic and sometimes stressful, but never dull. It feels, though, like Lies of P does ask a lot from its players. The parry timing felt so much more narrow than something like Sekiro or Wo Long's did, and some of the bosses expect you to really get good at this mechanic before you're able to beat them. This feels especially true as a lot of the bosses in the game had unpredictable combos and seemed to be able to delay their attacks to fake you out. Many times I thought a boss's combo string had ended, only to get my health bar deleted as it pulled out an extra couple of hits that I'd never seen before. I felt like I truly had to earn every victory that I achieved, and each area felt like a real struggle to get through and truly challenged you as you sliced your way through to each Stargazer. The areas that you will be fighting your way through are incredibly diverse and interesting. You start in a train station and make your way across the city, hitting up locales like a ruined cathedral, an opera house, and my personal favourite area, an abandoned shopping arcade. All of these areas felt so atmospheric, and the sense of dread and decay in them was palpable. I really liked that there seemed to be a sense that real thought went into the design of the city, and the way that each area flows into the next never felt jarring or out of place. Graphically, I thought the game looked wonderful. Character and enemy models were really great to look at and watch move, and all their attacks looked and felt believable, and this is something that's really important for a game that is trying to be as horror-inducing as this one was. The backdrops of the city all looked great, and some of the vistas that I found were downright beautiful. The game never felt drab or dull, despite its ruined city themes. I played the entire game in performance mode, and I didn't notice any frame rates or drops below 60 frames per second, which is always something that is worthy of praise. The sound design in this game was another highlight for me. The music ranged from haunting to epic, and one standout song in particular is a boss theme in the cathedral that sounded a lot like Duel of the Fates from the Phantom Menace, and the combination of a really cool boss design and this incredibly hyped music made for a really intense and exciting fight. I also really loved that a little record icon pops up on the side of the screen in boss fights to tell you the name of the song that's playing, and I thought this was just a really neat touch. It was actually the sound design of the game that really wowed me, however. The sound of P's gears whirring as you pull off a Fable attack, or watch the big door opening animation was always a joy, and the sound of you hitting a parry and having an enemy weapon break in a shower of sparks was a thing of beauty that really highlighted the satisfaction that I already felt for getting the timing right. The sound and animation of sharpening P's weapons on his robot arm is just so good. There are also collectible records you can find or buy that you can play on the hotel gramophone, and all of these are pretty good, with the song Feel being a standout that I have listened to on repeat many times both in and out of game now. And it is these little extras for me that made me really love this game. The selection of costumes that you can unlock that have absolutely zero effect on your defense but just let you choose how dapper you look is something I would love more Souls-like games to carry forward. And if there is DLC for this game, I hope it comes with even more costume options and even more records. Also, there's a cat that you can pet, so what more could you want? Lastly then, let's talk about the achievements and trophies you will need to earn in Lies of P. As I mentioned earlier, there are 3 different endings that you can earn, and each one of them has a trophy tied to it, with 2 of these endings being tied to the honesty and lying mechanic. You will need to play through New Game Plus anyway, as some of the collectible records are only obtainable from merchants on your second run, and you will need to collect all of these records and gestures, as well as complete some other collectibles such as Cryptic Vessels and finding all the Trinity Sanctums. Keep an eye out for different coloured butterflies, as there is a trophy for killing each one of the different colours, but they also drop incredibly useful upgrade materials which you will need. There are also some side character quests that give different rewards and trophies depending on your choices, so 2 playthroughs are a minimum. Many of these are missable, so it's best to stick to one choice throughout your run and then do the opposite on New Game Plus. Also, make sure you return to the hotel regularly between chapters to exhaust everyone's dialogue. There are, obviously, trophies for beating each of the main bosses in the game and collecting all the weapons the game has to offer. There are also trophies for upgrading, where you will need to upgrade a normal weapon, a special boss weapon, 1 Legion arm, and increase your P organ to phase 5, which is the max level you can get on your first run. There is no sugarcoating it. I found Lies of P to be incredibly hard at some points of the game, and if this is your first Souls-like, I imagine it will take some adjusting to. And New Game Plus only makes this harder, but it really is only the bosses that get a huge jump in difficulty. If I were to give any advice, it would be to stock up on throwables, as many of the bosses take a lot of damage from these. The shotput in particular can trigger the fatal stagger if the boss HP bar is glowing white, so you can get your big fatal attack in. The Aegis Legion arm is so good once it's upgraded, so you can attack while guarding, and also tap the weapon guard button for a much larger parry window than the regular weapon parry. This wrecks so many bosses' stagger threshold and lets you get lots of big attacks in. Also, try to keep your weight below 60% to keep the best balance between stamina regen and defense. I would rate this game easily a 7 or 8 out of 10 in difficulty, but perhaps a 9 if you've never played a game in this genre before. In summary, Lies of P is one of the best games I've played so far this year, and in a year with Baldur's Gate 3, Final Fantasy 16 and the Resi 4 remake in it, it has some incredible competition. Its obvious adoration of its source material and Bloodborne make what should have been a ridiculous concept into something truly fun and memorable. Even with a few boss fights I felt could have been made a little bit less challenging, it has become a game that I adore, and more than holds its own amongst the genre's best.